Man, that bouncer renewal sure does look sexy. Oh, hello fellow wand lovers, didn't see you there. Have you seen the latest headline? If not, then I strongly suggest checking it out because it was a really big one. Perhaps the most important part is the announcement of a bouncer overhaul. Bouncer definitely needed it, but people immediately started to wonder if other classes, including Techter, might also receive a renewal treatment like this in the future. Let's have a discussion about it, shall we? Before we start, I'd like to point out that a class receiving an overhaul this early sets a very strong precedent. If you watch my history on Techter video, you'll remember that Techter in PSO2 was in dire need of an overhaul very early on in the game's life. The devs absolutely hated the idea of overhauling anything, and that's why till this day many OG classes in PSO2 are plagued with poorly designed weapons, skills, or even skill rings. PSO2 didn't start overhauling classes until it was too late. Luckily, this isn't the case here, and while the jury is still out on how good this bouncer overhaul is going to be, it is very reassuring that the devs are willing to take a serious look at their classes, and redo them if needed. I'd also like to preface this video by saying that I'm not a min-max player. I'm just a nerd who likes to crunch numbers a lot, but lacks the finger dexterity to back it up. I'm semi-casual about my gameplay. I care enough to make needlessly detailed Excel sheets for myself, but not enough to start jet boot breakdancing and encore jumping. So, with that out of the way, does Techter need an overhaul? First of all, why would any class need an overhaul to begin with? Bouncer, statistically was fine, it did good damage, that wasn't the problem. What was problematic was that certain mechanics were either exploitable, didn't work correctly, or were simply unfun. Personally speaking, encore jumping, while spamming weapon action during Fanatic Blade, isn't exactly how I imagine a fun gameplay experience. People were so dissatisfied with Bouncer that a large portion of the community were planning a #SaveBouncer movement. Though they didn't even get a chance to go public with it because the devs were faster. But my point is that this overhaul didn't need to happen, but it did happen. The devs learned their lesson from ignoring the issues of a class in PSO2. At least I hope they did, because Talis has many issues to talk about. Now, do I believe Wand needs an overhaul? Not a complete overhaul, but there are a few problems with this weapon. Let's start with Wand lovers. Ever since the SEGA update, Wand gameplay loop has solidified to revolve around Revoke Pursuit. Basically, the faster you can spam this button, the higher your DPS will be. Prior to SEGA, we had two types of Furies, normal and strong. With the SEGA update they added a third version, so we renamed normal Furies to level 1, strong Furies to level 2, and the new one became level 3. The damage is the same between these three, but resource generation differs between them. This is important when talking about Wand lovers. Wand lovers is supposed to be Techter's burst damage button, in which normal attacks become supercharged, and your primary attack for the duration. At least I think that's the idea behind this skill, because Wand lovers isn't really doing any burst damage at all. The first and second step of the normal attack combo are weak and end up bottlenecking the overall DPS potential of a full normal attack combo. The buff ends up only benefiting combos that skip these two normal attacks entirely. There is also this annoying inconsistent bug where block counters will have hit stop for some reason, and completely negate the potency buff you're supposed to get from Wand lovers. And on top of all that, normal attacks during Wand lovers will still use level 1 Photonic Furies, slowing down the amount of resources you build, and thus lowering your overall damage. So, I think this area definitely could see some improvements. Fixing this bug with block counter, increasing the potency of first and second normal attack and making sure normal attacks inflict level 2 Photonic Furies would be a step in the right direction. But honestly, I'd love if Wand lovers apply to Photon Arts as well. Gaining attack speed and faster charge time on Swift Smash alone would solidify Wand lovers as a really strong burst damage button. I'd also like for Wand lovers to receive a short charge skill. 30 seconds duration with a 90-second cooldown is simply too long for what it's needed for. Most burst phases don't last longer than 10 seconds. I'd also like if the vertical tracking on counters wasn't exclusive to Wand lovers. There are so many counters I've missed simply because I was either too high or too low. This really shouldn't be a problem, especially since some other weapons have hit scan counters and never miss. Now, let me be a little controversial. Light techniques suck harder than me on a Sunday night. I don't know who at the dev team thought that the primary element used against Dark Falls should have the same accuracy as my intoxicated father figure. In PSO2, Grants never missed because it was a hitscan attack, but when transitioning to NGS, it feels like they threw the baby out with the bathwater. Grant's glitter is also a terrible elemental gimmick. Force players are getting punished when they're unable to refresh it every 10 seconds, and Dark Falls enemies love to waste time in the untargetable realm. Meanwhile, for Techter and Bouncer players, this skill simply doesn't offer anything because it's not designed with burst damage in mind. Let me demonstrate. Techniques are designed around their average damage. Let's take Megid's Sphere for example. It takes 3 uncharged techniques at roughly 300 DPS to gather 3 spheres. These spheres then supercharge the next charge technique into a nearly 600 DPS attack, but on average this entire combo has roughly 400 DPS. However, because the bulk of the damage is backloaded, this is very beneficial to us Techters and Bouncers. When we perform Fomelgen, we instantly accumulate 3 Megid Spheres. This gives us access to that supercharged dark technique without having to waste our time on this low DPS part of the combo. Light techniques don't have that. Even wind and fire techniques have a shred of burst damage, but light techniques are solely designed for continuous use, which doesn't mesh with Techter or Bouncer. Tech customization might fix it though. I didn't expect this would happen, but it seems that the customization options do also refer to skill tree skills. So this has the potential to change Grants to behave similarly to Foyi Brand, which would be much more useful for us. While on the topic of techniques, they have always been the weakest link in our rotation. In order to fix this, I propose skills that incentivize using techniques after a revoke. A couple of technique-related buffs that improve the process of building the elemental gimmicks naturally would do the trick. This would result in a tech phase, so to speak, and would solidify Techter as a hybrid class. The devs always wanted to give Techter a tech phase, but could never quite get it. I think this time they are really close to pulling it off, they just have to commit to it. Alternatively, you could just eliminate the charge time on the next technique after a revoke, though I feel like that would be a very boring solution. Some general quality of life improvements for techniques would also be nice. We don't have to be as good as Force with techniques, but they should feel like a more natural part of our kit, rather than just the button we press after a revoke. Now that we covered unpolished things about Wand, let's talk about Talis. This weapon has a lot of issues, but I believe the biggest one is that the weapon simply hasn't evolved since it was released. Every skill released since launch is a simple number increase in one way or another. And this wouldn't be that big of an issue if Talis' core gameplay loop was incredible, but sadly it is very monotonous and under-designed. As mentioned in the previous video, a lot of buttons we end up using are DPS losses, some skill tree skills are either useless or actively detrimental, and Tricky Capacitor takes way too long to build up, and doesn't deal nearly as much damage as Wand. On top of that, the step counter is harder to perform than most weapon action alternatives, and it doesn't deal as much damage as you'd expect from a counter. This leads to a weapon that is designed with force in mind, even though it serves a redundant purpose, since Rod is already a superior ranged weapon, while not providing enough benefits for Techter, who would otherwise benefit greatly from a ranged weapon. If there is one thing the devs need to overhaul, it is this weapon. I want Talis to be good, but if the devs continue to ignore its issues, then the Talis redesign they did, when transitioning from PSO2 to NGS, will end up being a wasted effort. Now, let's talk about something that kinda hampers the performance of tech classes, and that's downs. Half of our shift of potency is tied to downs. Force deals 30% more damage during a down, and Bouncer increases down factor accumulation for everyone who attacks the same target. By design there is nothing wrong with the system, but there are a few quirks that in my opinion the devs should be more considerate of. What am I talking about? Well, you might have noticed a trend with Dark Falls raids, but downs are highly curated in those quests. During Dark Falls Interception Round 2, you'll find it's very hard to trigger an elemental down during Phase 1, but it's very easy to do so in Phase 2. Meanwhile, physical downs are outright impossible in Phase 1, and in Phase 2 the only body part that can contribute to a physical down is the head, which is the very last body part you'll attack before he dies. At least we get some special downs when breaking arms. That's more than I can say about Dark Falls Aegis, because Aegis simply can't be physically downed, and it's very unlikely you'll get more than one break and elemental down. There are no special downs either, so half of our shift of potency rarely goes to use. This was luckily improved with Dark Falls Solace. It is very easy to get 2 breaks, 2 physical downs when the head is targetable, and special downs when breaking its shoulders and staff. Overall, I'd say it's a well-designed fight, but I omitted elemental downs in here because unfortunately it's very unlikely that one tech user will trigger it by themselves. In my runs, where I was using a Justitian wand and bouncer subclass, I simply am unable to trigger an elemental down by myself. I need at least one other tech user in my party to be able to do it. In my opinion, it shouldn't be like this. It diminishes Techter's contribution to the fight a little bit, but I'm nitpicking at that point. Overall, I think Dark Falls Solace is the best designed Dark Falls we've gotten so far in NGS. I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that our support with Shifta is a little bit inconsistent because of the enemy design. And that leads me to my next topic. Techter is a support class, however the amount of support was greatly stripped down compared to PSO2, and it's an area I wish the devs would expand on so that our contribution to the party feels more meaningful. In PSO2, we had at least one support tech per element, on top of some cool skills that amplified those abilities further. A decent chunk of it was streamlined and carried over into NGS. We even got a Toiles overdrive. Yes, I have learned French since the Scion video. You can stop bullying me now. A lot of support techniques have been left on the cutting room floor. Which is honestly a shame because some of these could be incorporated really easily into New Genesis. Let's start with anti. The devs don't want to make the same mistake as in PSO2, where status ailments kinda became a joke, with anti being an unlimited source of status ailment removal. One that even rewards you, and your healed ally, by making your PP recovery faster than the speed of light. But I don't think removing it entirely was the best choice. I'd like overemphasis to be expanded with a status ailment cleansing effect, as well as receive a short charge skill that will reduce the cooldown from 5 to 3 minutes. This will keep the cleansing effect to a very limited resource, and the skill won't take half the quest to charge up anymore. Next on the list is Xanverse. Now, I'm personally not a big fan of Xanverse. In PSO2, Xanverse is a very short field that lasts for roughly 5 seconds, and deals any damage dealt inside, back towards the enemy, as wind damage in a 5-to-1 ratio. What I don't like about this field is that because it's always available, and has a short duration, you rarely get to do your own rotation because you have to constantly refresh the field. It's not much of an issue on Wand because PSO2 Wand had no rotation, but on Gunblade it's rather jarring. An easy solution to all of these issues would be to simply make Xanverse part of our rotation. This can be achieved easily by making it appear after an elemental revoke, and this would also allow Xanverse to take the element that was discharged as well. The only issue with this approach is that Talis wouldn't have access to it. Now, Zondil is one of the techs I'm almost convinced will not return, which is a shame because it's a really important one for Wand. I didn't mention it in my guide video, but Photonic Fury stacking from PSO2 still exists in NGS. What I'm talking about is the phenomenon when enemies are close to each other, and you hit them both with one swing, causing a Photonic Fury on both. But because they're so close to each other, the AoE effect ends up hitting each of them, which exponentially skyrockets Wand's AoE DPS. In PSO2 we could use Zondil to consistently trigger this stacking effect, but over time more and more enemies developed resistance towards Zondil, and now we don't even have Zondil at all. If the devs ever change their mind about Zondil, I'd love for them to add a similar effect to the second swing of Wave Crash. And hey, maybe that will be one option to choose from when customizing Wave Crash. I honestly don't care for Megiverse, and on that note, I don't think bringing back Resta as a separate spammable button would add anything to Techter. Resta Signa are already plenty. Even in Dark Falls Solace on launch, I never ran out of these things because they just kept spawning throughout the fight. So I don't think adding more avenues for healing is needed. 2 Shifta and Debin buffs I missed from PSO2 are Shifta Critical and Debin Toughness. When Slayer came out, and had crit rate as its class gimmick, I was almost convinced that the new skills each class would get with the release of version 2, would include some conditional crit rate modifiers. But that didn't happen, and that is just a bummer. Meanwhile Debin Toughness increased your max HP by so much that it was hard not to notice a Techter's presence in the quest. NGS Shifted Debin feels much weaker because of the lack of these skills, and I don't think our contribution is nearly as good as Ranger, whose Blight rounds increase damage dealt by up to 25%. You probably noticed a theme with the changes I'm proposing. None of them introduce any new buttons to the game. Instead fleshing out buttons that already exist. This is simply to prevent button bloat, which was a big issue in PSO2, and Techter still suffers from to an extent. compound techniques taking up 3 buttons on the palette is the biggest contributor to that, but I'm not exactly sure how to streamline this in an intuitive way. On top of that, the multi-weapon system further snowballs bloat out of control. But those are just my thoughts on a possible Techter renewal. I'm sure some of you have your own ideas and grievances with the class that I might have missed. Share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what everyone has to say on the matter. As always, huge shout out to my lovely channel members supporting this channel. You can join for just $1 a month. I hope everyone has a fantastic day and that the bouncer rework turns out to be fantastic. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.